3 Apache widows mock the cowboy until the chief orders them to marry him. Samuel rode slowly across the dusty plains, the hot sun beating down on his back. He had been traveling for several days, moving from town to town in search of work and a place to rest. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Bella, was weary but faithful, following Samuel's careful guidance without complaint. The cowboy was a tall man, with broad shoulders and sun-weathered skin from years spent outdoors. His clothes were worn, patched in several places, but he wore them with a quiet pride that spoke of years of experience surviving on the harsh frontier. As he approached a line of low hills, Samuel noticed smoke rising in the distance. Curious, he steered Bella toward it, keeping his senses alert for danger. In his travels, he had learned that the plains could be both beautiful and unforgiving. There were moments of calm when the wind would sweep across the grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and wildflowers, and there were moments of fear, when bandits or wild animals could appear without warning. Samuel had learned to trust his instincts and to remain calm, even when he was far from help. The smoke led him to a small settlement, unlike the towns he had visited before. This place was surrounded by wooden fences and simple homes made of earth and stone. Children ran freely between the buildings, laughing and playing with sticks and stones. Older men sat outside, sharpening tools and repairing gear, while women moved about their daily tasks with careful efficiency. From the moment Samuel arrived, he sensed a difference. This was not a place built for outsiders, and he could feel the watchful eyes on him as he rode in. As he entered the settlement, Samuel slowed his horse and tried to appear friendly. He tipped his hat to the people he passed, offering a polite nod. Some returned the gesture, but many looked away, hesitant and wary. Samuel understood this. He had spent enough time on the frontier to know that trust was not given lightly. He had to earn it. He dismounted near the center of the settlement, tying Bella to a post while he looked around. That's when he noticed them, 3 women sitting together on a low bench, their expressions sharp and curious. They were older than the children and younger than the elders, each carrying an air of quiet strength. Their clothing was simple but well-made, adorned with patterns that hinted at their family and community. Samuel guessed they might be widows, based on the way the other villagers treated them with respect and deference. The women looked at Samuel and immediately began to whisper among themselves. He could not understand their words, but their laughter was unmistakable. It was soft at first, but then it grew, filling the air with a sound that was both playful and mocking. Samuel felt a slight sting of embarrassment. He was used to being respected in his work as a cowboy, and here, in this strange settlement, he realized that he was the outsider, the stranger who did not yet belong. He took a deep breath and approached them slowly. "Hello," he said, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "I'm Samuel. I mean no trouble. I'm just looking for a place to rest and maybe some work if you have it." The women paused their laughter and looked him over, their eyes sharp and assessing. One of them, the tallest of the 3, raised an eyebrow and said something in her language, gesturing toward him with a hand that was both dismissive and curious. The other 2 chuckled quietly, exchanging glances that made Samuel realize he was being tested. He had encountered mockery before, of course, but never like this. There was a cleverness in their eyes, a challenge that demanded more than mere politeness. Samuel decided to try a different approach. He knelt to adjust Bella's saddle, speaking softly to his horse as he worked. He hoped that by showing skill and patience, he might earn some respect. The women watched him for a long moment, their laughter subsiding into quiet observation. Samuel could feel their eyes on him, measuring his every move. He knew that his success here depended not on brute strength or showy tricks, but on quiet competence and understanding. After a while, Samuel stood and smiled. "I've traveled far," he said. "I know how to handle horses and I can help with hunting or chores. I'm willing to learn whatever else you need." This seemed to amuse the women further. They whispered again, pointing at him and laughing softly, though now it was less mocking and more curious. Samuel realized that he needed to be patient. In his experience, communities like this did not welcome outsiders quickly, but once trust was earned, it was lasting and strong. He walked through the settlement, observing the daily life of the people. Children ran barefoot across the dirt paths, their laughter echoing against the low buildings. Women carried water from the well, carefully balancing clay pots on their heads. Men worked with hammers and saws, repairing fences and tools. Samuel noticed the care and efficiency in their actions, the way every person contributed to the community. He felt a deep respect for the settlement and a growing desire to be part of it, even though he knew it would take time and effort. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the settlement, Samuel returned to the three women. They were still sitting together, their faces calm now but still watchful. He approached slowly, offering a small gift he had brought, a simple piece of cloth, dyed in bright colors folded neatly. "For you," he said, placing it on the bench before them. The women exchanged glances, and then the tallest one spoke, her voice measured but not unkind. She explained something about the cloth, gesturing with her hands. Samuel did not understand her words, but he could tell from her tone that she was acknowledging the gesture. The other two women nodded slightly, their eyes softening as they looked at him. For the first time since arriving, Samuel felt a small bridge forming between himself and the community. He realized that the path ahead would not be easy. He would need to learn the language, understand the customs, and earn the trust of people who had every reason to be cautious of outsiders. But he also felt a sense of hope. Here, in this remote settlement, he saw the possibility of belonging, of finding purpose and connection beyond the endless wandering of the plains. Night fell, and Samuel settled near the edge of the settlement, setting up a small fire to cook a simple meal. Bella grazed quietly nearby, her ears flicking at the sounds of the community settling down for the evening. Samuel thought about the women, about their laughter and sharp eyes, and wondered what stories lay behind those expressions. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps new opportunities to prove himself. As he lay back against a log, gazing at the stars above, Samuel felt a strange sense of peace. He was far from home, far from the familiar trails and towns he had known, but he was not alone. Around him, life continued in its quiet, determined rhythm, and somewhere within it, he sensed the first threads of a connection that might one day grow into trust, friendship, or even more. And so, as the night wrapped the settlement in darkness, Samuel closed his eyes, ready to face whatever the next day would bring, knowing that his journey had led him here for a reason, and that every challenge and every mockery would teach him something about the land, the people, and himself. The next morning, Samuel woke to the sound of birds chirping and the distant laughter of children running through the settlement. The air was cool and fresh, a welcome relief from the heat of the previous day. He stretched his arms and looked around, noticing how alive the village was even in the early hours. The women were already at work, tending to their daily chores. Samuel felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Today, he would try to prove himself, to show that he was capable and trustworthy. After a quick breakfast of bread and dried meat, Samuel approached the three women. They were sitting near the center of the settlement, their hands busy with weaving and preparing food. Their eyes met his, sharp and assessing as always. He cleared his throat. "I can help with anything you need," he said gently. "If there's work to be done, I'd like to do it." The tallest woman, whose name Samuel had learned was Nayeli, tilted her head and studied him for a long moment. Then she spoke in her language, her tone a mix of amusement and challenge. The other two women, Ahioka and Tayanita, nodded along, their expressions curious. Samuel did not understand their words, but he could tell by their gestures and tone that they were testing him. He needed to respond in a way that showed respect without appearing afraid or desperate. Samuel decided to help with the chores. He carried water from the well, careful not to spill a drop. He helped chop wood for the morning fire, and he assisted the men with repairing a broken fence. Throughout the day, the women watched him closely. Sometimes they whispered to each other, sometimes they laughed quietly, but Samuel noticed a shift in their attention. His efforts were beginning to be recognized, though the laughter and mockery had not completely stopped. In the afternoon, Samuel asked if he could help with hunting. The women's laughter returned at this, soft but teasing, and Naomi shook her head as if warning him. Samuel smiled, undeterred. He knew that hunting would test his skills and patience, and he was eager to show that he could provide for the settlement in a meaningful way. He followed an older man named Mato, who was known for his knowledge of the land and tracking animals. Samuel listened carefully to Mato's instructions, learning how to read tracks, understand the direction of the wind, and move silently through the brush. It was exhausting work, but Samuel felt a growing sense of connection with the land and the people who lived on it. The women watched from a distance, their expressions still teasing, but now with a hint of curiosity about his abilities. By the end of the day, Samuel and Mato had successfully hunted a small deer. Samuel carried it back to the settlement, careful to honor the animal and the rules of the community. The women approached him, their expressions now more serious. Naomi spoke first, explaining something about the proper way to prepare the meat. Samuel listened carefully, asking questions when necessary, and followed her instructions. The process was slow and deliberate, and he realized that these small lessons were as important as hunting itself. As evening fell, Samuel noticed that the widows' mockery had changed. Their laughter was no longer sharp or cruel but softer, almost playful. They began to ask him questions, though still in their own language. Samuel did not understand all the words, but the tone of voice made it clear that they were interested in him and his life. He answered as best he could, using gestures and simple words, and the women seemed satisfied with his efforts. That night, Samuel sat by his fire, reflecting on the day. He felt a quiet pride in what he had accomplished, but he also recognized that this was only the beginning. The widows were intelligent, strong, and independent, and earning their trust would take more than a single day of work. He understood that respect and patience were essential, and that he would need to show consistency, honesty, and humility in all his actions. The following days passed in a similar rhythm. Samuel helped with chores, assisted with hunting, and worked alongside the men repairing fences and tools. Each day, he learned more about the community's customs and traditions. He observed the care with which the women managed their homes, the precision of the men in their tasks, and the playful yet disciplined way the children learned from their elders. Samuel realized that this settlement had survived challenges and hardships, and that each person's role was vital to their continued survival. Despite his growing integration, the widows continued to tease him. They would imitate his clumsy movements when he carried water or make exaggerated gestures when he attempted to perform household tasks. At first, Samuel found this frustrating, but over time he began to see it as a form of engagement. Their laughter was no longer a barrier, but a way to test his patience and sense of humor. Samuel learned to laugh with them, matching their wit and finding ways to respond without losing his composure. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the fence, Samuel overheard the women speaking more seriously among themselves. He could not understand the words, but their tone was different, less teasing, more thoughtful. Naomi glanced at him occasionally, and Samuel felt a subtle acknowledgement of his efforts. He realized that his actions were slowly changing their perception of him. He was no longer just a stranger to mock. He was someone who was proving himself through work, respect, and persistence. The turning point came when a small problem arose in the settlement. A group of young boys had accidentally let some of the livestock escape. Samuel sprang into action, coordinating with the men to round up the animals and bring them safely back. He used his knowledge of the plains and his skill with horses to anticipate the animals' movements. The task was difficult and exhausting, but he completed it successfully. The widows watched this unfold, their expressions serious now. They did not laugh, but their eyes followed Samuel closely, noting his calmness under pressure, his careful planning, and his willingness to take responsibility. That evening, Naeli approached him, speaking in her language with gestures that seemed more deliberate than before. Samuel did his best to respond, nodding and smiling, showing that he understood her meaning. The interaction was brief, but it marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Over the next few weeks, Samuel became a familiar presence in the settlement. He had earned small measures of trust, though the women's teasing never completely stopped. It had transformed from mocking laughter to playful banter, a sign that they were beginning to accept him as part of their daily lives. Samuel continued to learn the language, customs, and skills that were important to the community, always mindful of their traditions and expectations. One day, the chief of the settlement, an older man named Tamu, called Samuel to speak with him. Samuel approached respectfully, unsure of what was expected. Tamu's gaze was steady and wise, and he spoke with authority and calm. Though Samuel could not fully understand the words, he sensed their importance. The chief's eyes also shifted toward the three widows, and Samuel realized that something significant was being discussed. From that day forward, Samuel understood that his presence in the settlement had a purpose beyond simple work or survival. He was being observed, tested, and considered for a role that was deeper than he had imagined. The women's laughter, once a source of discomfort, had become a challenge and an invitation, a way to engage with him and assess his character. Samuel felt both nervous and determined, knowing that earning their full trust would require courage, patience, and consistent effort. Life in the settlement settled into a rhythm, with Samuel finding a delicate balance between work, learning, and social interaction. The widows continued to tease him, but now there were moments of genuine connection, small gestures of acceptance, and shared laughter that spoke of trust being built. Samuel realized that he had begun to belong in this place, not as an outsider, but as someone willing to understand, respect, and contribute. And so, each day brought new lessons, challenges, and opportunities for Samuel to prove himself. He learned that respect was not demanded, it was earned. He discovered that patience and humility were as important as skill and strength. Most importantly, he realized that even in a place where mockery and challenge were part of daily life, there was room for growth, connection, and a sense of belonging. By the end of the second part of his journey, Samuel had changed. He was no longer just a traveler passing through the plains. He was a part of a community, slowly earning a place among its people, and learning the subtle ways in which trust, respect, and understanding could transform relationships, even those that began with laughter and mockery. Life in the settlement had settled into a quiet rhythm, yet beneath the calm, a subtle tension always lingered. Samuel had grown accustomed to his new responsibilities, moving with careful purpose from one task to another. He helped the men with fences and hunting, assisted the women with chores, and did his best to learn the language and customs of the community. But even as he worked hard, he knew that he had not yet truly proven himself to the three widows. Naeli, Ahioka, and Tayanita still teased him, testing his patience, and sometimes Samuel could feel their sharp, evaluating gazes weighing on him as he moved through the settlement. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Samuel noticed a ripple of concern among the villagers. The children were unusually quiet, huddled near their mothers, and the men spoke in low tones, glancing toward the edge of the settlement. Samuel approached Mato, the older man who had taught him the ways of the land, and asked what was happening. Mato shook his head gravely, pointing toward the horizon. Samuel squinted and saw a distant dust cloud rising steadily from the plains beyond the hills. "The rivals are coming," Mato said quietly, his voice tense. Samuel understood immediately. Rival groups occasionally passed through this part of the territory, and sometimes their visits were violent. The settlement had survived attacks before, but the threat was real, and the community would need to prepare. Samuel's heart quickened. He had faced danger before, but this felt different. This time, he was not just protecting himself. He was part of a community, responsible for the people who had cautiously accepted him. The chief, Tamu, gathered the men and women in the center of the settlement. Samuel joined them, standing near the edge, aware of the widow's eyes following him. The chief spoke with authority, outlining a plan to protect the settlement. Samuel listened intently, watching how each member of the community had a role, how every action mattered. The chief then turned to Samuel, his gaze steady, as if testing him in silence. Samuel nodded, indicating that he was ready to follow orders, but inside, a mix of fear and determination churned. The challenge began immediately. Samuel joined the men in fortifying the fences, securing the livestock, and preparing defensive positions. Every movement counted, and he had to act quickly and thoughtfully. The widows, while primarily occupied with protecting the children and tending to the households, occasionally watched him, their expressions unreadable. Samuel felt the weight of their judgment. Every decision, every action was being observed. He knew that this was a test of his courage, skill, and character. As the sun climbed higher, the dust cloud approached, revealing a small group of outsiders riding hard across the plains. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest. These were not friendly travelers. They were armed and clearly intended to intimidate or challenge the settlement. The villagers took their positions, ready to defend their home. Samuel mounted Bella, feeling the familiar strength of his horse beneath him and prepared to act alongside the men. Then something unexpected happened. The chief called Samuel forward, his voice firm but calm. Samuel approached, uncertain what was being asked. Tamu's eyes shifted toward the widows, and then back to Samuel. The chief's gestures were clear. He expected Samuel to take a leadership role, to coordinate the defense, and most importantly, to stand as a representative of the settlement to face this threat. Samuel felt a surge of responsibility. He had earned a place among these people through work and patience, but now he had to step into a role he had never imagined. Samuel quickly organized the men, assigning tasks and positions. He guided them to the best vantage points, instructed them on securing the livestock, and planned contingencies for different scenarios. The rival group approached cautiously, testing the settlement's defenses. Samuel stayed calm, speaking with confidence and clarity, his voice carrying over the wind. The villagers followed his instructions, moving with purpose and efficiency. Even the widows, who had been watching from the sidelines, now observed him with a mixture of respect and cautious approval. Hours passed with tense preparation. The rival riders circled the settlement, assessing the situation, but no attack came immediately. Samuel realized that this moment was critical, not just for the immediate safety of the people, but for his place within the community. How he acted, how he led, and how he respected the traditions of the settlement would determine whether he was truly accepted. He focused on every detail, making careful decisions, and constantly checking the actions of both men and women to ensure they were safe and effective. Finally, the chief called a brief meeting in the center of the settlement. Samuel, sweating and exhausted, joined the group. Tamu's face was serious, and he spoke in his language, gesturing towards Samuel and the widows. Though Samuel did not fully understand the words, the tone and gestures made it clear that something important was being decided. Naeli, Ahioka, and Teanita exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but intense. Samuel felt a mix of anticipation and fear, wondering what role he was now expected to play. The chief made a final gesture towards Samuel and the widows, an order that was unexpected and bold. Samuel's eyes widened. From the gestures and the serious faces of the widows, he realized the chief intended for him to marry them, not as a simple union, but as a formal connection recognized by the community. The widow's eyes flashed with surprise, and Samuel's mind raced. This was beyond anything he had imagined when he first arrived in the settlement. He looked at the widows. Naeli's expression was firm but curious, Ahioka's cautious, and Tayanita's a mixture of shock and amusement. Samuel understood that this was not just about marriage in a personal sense. It was a test of loyalty, courage, and willingness to accept responsibility for the community's cohesion. The chief's decision was final, and Samuel knew he had to respond with respect, humility, and understanding. Samuel's first instinct was disbelief. He had never expected such an order, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on him. Yet he also recognized the wisdom behind the chief's decision. These women were strong, intelligent, and integral to the settlement. The union would symbolize trust, commitment, and the willingness of an outsider to become part of the community fully. Samuel took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and nodded respectfully to the chief, signaling that he would accept the responsibility. The reaction of the widows was complex. Naeli, who had always been sharp and confident, studied Samuel closely. Her eyes searched his face, seeking signs of sincerity and respect. Ahioka appeared cautious, unsure whether to trust this outsider with such an important role. Tayanita's expression, however, held a glimmer of amusement, as if she found the situation both absurd and intriguing. Their laughter from before had faded, replaced by a serious curiosity. Over the next few days, Samuel focused on understanding the responsibilities the chief had entrusted to him. He observed the widows carefully, learning their routines, preferences, and expectations. He sought to respect their independence while finding ways to contribute meaningfully to their lives and the settlement as a whole. Every small task became an opportunity to demonstrate patience, skill, and dedication. One afternoon, Samuel helped the widows with a communal task of gathering food and preparing it for the settlement. They worked together in silence at first, each focused on the task at hand. Samuel moved carefully, mindful not to overstep or appear clumsy. Gradually, the widows began to offer instructions, their voices firm but not unkind. Samuel followed them closely, showing attentiveness and willingness to learn. By the end of the task, the atmosphere had shifted. The women's glances were less skeptical, their laughter lighter, and a quiet understanding had begun to grow between them. The challenge of the settlement's safety and the chief's order forced Samuel to confront his own fears and limitations. He realized that acceptance was not given freely. It had to be earned through action, respect, and patience. Every decision he made, every effort he gave, became part of a larger pattern of proving himself to the community and to the women he would now be connected to in a profound way. By the time the sun set behind the hills, Samuel felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The dust cloud from the rival group had long since disappeared, and the settlement was calm once more. The chief had observed his actions carefully, the widows had assessed his character, and Samuel had learned that true courage was not only facing danger, but also facing responsibility with humility and wisdom. As night fell, Samuel sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the past days. The widows had transformed from teasing critics into individuals whose respect he needed to earn. The chief's decision, while shocking, was a test of his character, his patience, and his willingness to embrace a role that went beyond himself. Samuel understood that the coming days would require effort, understanding, and careful navigation of relationships, but he felt a sense of purpose that he had not known before. And so, Samuel lay under the stars, the quiet hum of the settlement surrounding him, knowing that the next chapter of his life would not be simple. The chief's order had set him on a path of challenges, growth, and unexpected responsibility. Yet for the first time, he felt a profound sense of connection to a community, to people who had tested him, laughed at him, and now relied on him in ways that were both daunting and meaningful. The journey was far from over, but Samuel was ready to face it with patience, courage, and respect, knowing that every challenge would shape him and the lives of those around him. After the chief's order, life in the settlement changed in ways Samuel had never expected. He awoke each morning with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The responsibility placed on him was heavy, yet he knew it was also an opportunity to prove his character, gain trust, and become a true part of the community. The widows, Naeli, Ahioka, and Teanita, continued their work with quiet efficiency, but their eyes occasionally followed him with careful curiosity. Samuel understood that their trust would not come quickly or easily, and he was determined to act with patience and respect in every interaction. The first few days after the chief's order were tense. Samuel tried to help wherever he could, assisting with chores, repairing fences, and tending to the livestock. The widows watched him closely, sometimes speaking sharply to correct his actions. When he carried water or chopped wood, they would occasionally shake their heads in amusement or mild disapproval, reminding him that precision and attentiveness were essential in every task. At first, Samuel felt frustrated. He was used to being capable and competent on the plains, but here, every small mistake was noticed and gently corrected. He realized that earning their trust would require humility as well as skill. Samuel began to observe the widows more closely, learning their routines, habits, and preferences. Naeli was practical and decisive, taking charge of organizing daily tasks and instructing the others. Ahioka was cautious, often pausing to think carefully before acting, and Teanita had a playful spirit, blending humor with intelligence. Samuel realized that each woman had a unique role in the household and the community, and understanding these roles was crucial for him to contribute meaningfully. He began to follow their instructions carefully, asking questions when necessary, and always showing respect for their knowledge. One afternoon, Samuel accompanied Naeli to the river to help gather water and wash clothes. The journey was quiet at first, each step deliberate as they walked along the rocky path. Naeli explained, through gestures and a few words Samuel understood, the proper way to handle the water, how to prevent spilling, and the importance of conserving it. Samuel listened carefully, nodding and following her guidance. Occasionally, Naeli would glance at him, her expression unreadable, as if testing whether he could truly grasp the lesson. By the time they returned, Samuel felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Naeli had acknowledged his effort with a small nod, and Samuel understood that progress was slow but steady. Meanwhile, Ahioka and Teanita continued to observe him, sometimes teasing him gently to test his patience. They would hide small tools, ask him tricky questions about the settlement, or challenge him to perform tasks he had not yet mastered. At first, Samuel felt a sting of embarrassment, but he soon realized that their tests were a form of engagement. The widows were curious about his character and his willingness to adapt. By responding with patience and humor, Samuel began to earn small measures of their respect. The chief, Tamu, continued to watch the situation carefully. Samuel noticed that the chief's gaze often lingered on him, assessing his decisions, actions, and interactions with the widows. Samuel understood that his integration into the community was still being evaluated, and that the chief's approval was essential for him to become a fully recognized member. This knowledge added pressure, but it also gave Samuel a clear sense of purpose. He was no longer just a traveler passing through. He was someone with responsibilities and obligations, and his actions mattered not only for himself but for the entire settlement. One day, a minor crisis arose. A sudden storm swept across the plains, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. The river swelled, threatening to flood parts of the settlement. Samuel immediately sprang into action, helping the villagers move livestock to higher ground and securing the homes as best he could. The widows worked alongside him, their efficiency and determination remarkable. Naeli gave clear instructions. Ahioka anticipated problems before they arose, and Tayanita kept spirits high with quiet humor. Samuel realized that their leadership was essential to the community's survival, and he followed their guidance closely, ensuring that every task was completed effectively. By the evening, the storm had passed, leaving the settlement wet and muddy but safe. The villagers expressed gratitude for Samuel's help, and the widows approached him with subtle approval. Naeli offered a small smile, Ahioka nodded respectfully, and Tayanita's playful laughter returned, lighter than before. Samuel felt a sense of relief and pride. He had acted with courage, patience, and attentiveness, and the women had acknowledged his effort in their own quiet ways. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel's relationship with the widows slowly evolved. They began to include him in conversations and decision-making, though always in ways that maintained their independence and authority. Samuel listened carefully, learned from their guidance, and offered his assistance when appropriate. Over time, their interactions became less formal and more collaborative. He learned to anticipate their needs, to respect their boundaries, and to communicate effectively despite the language barrier. The community also began to recognize Samuel's contributions. Men sought his advice on hunting and tracking, and children followed him with curiosity as he demonstrated skills they had not seen before. Samuel's presence became a stabilizing factor in the settlement, and the villagers gradually accepted him as someone they could rely on. The widows, while still independent and strong-willed, began to trust him as a partner in daily life. Their laughter became less about mockery and more about shared experiences, and Samuel found that small gestures of kindness and attentiveness went a long way in strengthening their bond. One evening, as Samuel sat near the fire, he reflected on how much had changed. The chief's order, which had seemed so shocking at first, had set him on a path of personal growth and connection. He had learned patience, humility, and the importance of listening and observing before acting. He had come to respect the widows, not only for their strength and intelligence, but also for their wisdom in maintaining the balance and harmony of the settlement. Samuel realized that the order had not been a burden but an opportunity, a chance to integrate fully into a community, and to build relationships based on trust, respect, and shared responsibility. The widows, too, began to show subtle signs of appreciation for Samuel's efforts. Naeli occasionally asked for his help with planning tasks, Ahioka sought his advice in small matters, and Tayanita included him in playful conversations. While they remained independent and strong, their interactions with Samuel had shifted from skepticism and mockery to cautious acceptance and respect. Samuel understood that earning this trust had required consistent effort, humility, and attentiveness, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that he was gradually becoming part of their lives. As the season changed and the settlement prepared for the challenges of winter, Samuel continued to prove himself. He hunted for food, repaired homes and fences, and assisted the widows with daily tasks. Each action reinforced his commitment to the community and to the women who had once mocked him. Slowly but surely, the bonds of trust and respect grew stronger, and Samuel realized that his presence was no longer questioned. He had become an integral part of the settlement, a partner in both work and life, and someone the community could rely upon. By the time the first snowflakes fell, covering the plains in a soft white blanket, Samuel felt a profound sense of belonging. The widows had become more than companions. They were teachers, friends, and guides who had helped him navigate the challenges of the settlement. The chief's decision, which had initially seemed overwhelming, had created an opportunity for growth, understanding, and connection. Samuel had learned that trust and respect were earned through consistent effort, attentiveness, and humility, and that even in the face of mockery and challenge, meaningful relationships could be built. That winter, the settlement was warm, safe, and united. Samuel worked alongside the villagers, shared stories by the fire, and learned to appreciate the rhythm of life in this unique community. The widows continued to guide him, their strength, intelligence, and wit shaping his actions and decisions. Samuel had grown from an outsider into someone who belonged, someone whose presence was valued and respected. As he lay beneath the stars on a cold winter night, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The mockery of the widows, the tests of patience and skill, and the chief's bold decision had all been steps in a path that taught him courage, humility, and the importance of connection. He realized that belonging was not simply about acceptance. It was about proving oneself through consistent effort, respect, and understanding. And in that realization, Samuel found peace, purpose, and the knowledge that he had become part of something greater than himself. The arrival of winter marked a new chapter in Samuel's life. Snow blanketed the settlement and the plains around it, softening the harsh lines of the land and bringing a quiet calm that contrasted with the tension of previous months. Samuel had grown stronger in his skills and more confident in his place among the villagers. Yet each day reminded him that belonging was not simply about surviving. It was about respect, trust, and meaningful connection. The three widows, Naeli, Ahioka, and Tayanita, were central to that journey. Over time, their mockery had transformed into gentle guidance, and Samuel understood that their approval was both a challenge and a gift. The mornings were cold, and Samuel would rise early to help with chores before the women began their daily tasks. He chopped wood for fires, tended to the livestock, and checked the fences for any signs of weakness. The widows moved gracefully around him, working in tandem, often offering subtle instructions, and sometimes sharing small laughs that no longer stung but warmed him with a sense of connection. Samuel learned the rhythms of their lives, the way Naeli organized tasks, the way Ahioka carefully planned her day, and the way Tayanita brought lightness even to difficult moments. He found that observing and listening was as important as acting. One day, Samuel noticed a problem with the supply of firewood. A storm the previous night had knocked down several trees near the settlement, but many of them were too heavy for the villagers to move alone. Samuel suggested a plan to carefully cut and carry the wood in small, manageable sections. Naeli and Ahioka examined his idea, and after some discussion, they agreed to try it. Tayanita, as always, added humor to the situation, joking about how the task might teach Samuel patience. Samuel smiled, grateful for their engagement, and worked alongside the women and the men, lifting, cutting, and organizing the wood with care. By midday, the pile of firewood had grown steadily, enough to last the village through the coldest weeks of winter. The widows looked at Samuel with quiet approval. Naeli gave him a nod that conveyed recognition. Ahioka's smile was subtle but genuine, and Tayanita laughed lightly, a sound that had once been teasing but now carried warmth. Samuel felt a surge of pride and gratitude. It was more than physical work. It was a demonstration of teamwork, trust, and mutual respect. As winter progressed, Samuel learned the importance of supporting the widows not only through physical labor, but through attentiveness and understanding. He observed the small details of their daily lives, the way they prepared food, cared for children, and maintained their homes. Samuel began to anticipate needs before they were voiced, offering help with quiet efficiency and respect. When Naeli struggled to carry water, or when Ahioka needed assistance with a heavy load, Samuel stepped in without being asked, learning the subtle ways that trust and partnership were built over time. The settlement faced another challenge that winter. A harsh snowstorm struck unexpectedly, blocking paths, covering livestock in deep drifts and making hunting nearly impossible. Samuel worked tirelessly alongside the villagers to clear paths, protect the animals, and gather enough food to sustain everyone. The widows coordinated much of the effort, guiding Samuel and the men to act efficiently and safely. Tayanita's humor helped ease the tension, while Naeli's practical leadership ensured that nothing was overlooked. Samuel realized that this shared struggle created a bond stronger than any single act of kindness or bravery. It was the combination of effort, responsibility, and care that truly mattered. During the long winter nights, the villagers gathered around fires, sharing stories, songs, and laughter. Samuel often sat beside the widows, listening to their tales and gradually learning the language through repetition and context. Naeli would recount stories of the settlement's history, Ahioka shared lessons learned from her experiences, and Tayanita entertained everyone with playful anecdotes. Samuel realized that these moments were as important as any physical task. They fostered connection, understanding, and trust. Over time, he began to participate in the stories, recounting his own experiences on the plains, earning smiles and laughter in return. The bond between Samuel and the widows deepened in subtle ways. Naeli began consulting him for advice on daily tasks. Ahioka involved him in planning and organizing, and Tayanita increasingly included him in moments of humor and camaraderie. Samuel had learned to respect their independence while offering help where appropriate. He understood that true partnership required humility, attentiveness, and a willingness to support without controlling. The widows, in turn, began to trust his judgment, recognize his efforts, and accept him as a reliable presence in their lives. One particularly harsh evening, the settlement faced a minor emergency. A young child had wandered too close to the edge of the snow-covered riverbank, slipping and nearly falling into the icy water. Samuel acted quickly, moving with skill and determination to pull the child to safety. The villagers breathed sighs of relief, and the widow's expressions shifted from fear to gratitude. Naeli placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, a gesture of recognition and trust. Ahioka smiled softly, and Tayanita's laughter returned, light and joyful. Samuel realized that moments like these, small crises handled with care and courage, were the true measures of belonging and responsibility. As the winter months wore on, Samuel became increasingly confident in his role within the settlement. He had earned the trust of the widows and the respect of the community. The chief, Tamu, occasionally observed from a distance, his gaze calm and approving. Samuel understood that he had been tested not only by his actions, but also by his patience, humility, and ability to work alongside others without arrogance. He had transformed from a stranger into someone integral to the life of the settlement. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow and revealing the green shoots of new life. Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the mockery of the widows, the chief's bold decision, the challenges of survival, and the lessons of patience, humility, and respect. He had learned that trust was not granted freely, but earned through consistent effort, attentiveness, and understanding. He had learned to observe, listen, and act with care, building relationships that were strong, genuine, and enduring. The widows, too, had changed in subtle ways. Naeli, who had once been skeptical and sharp, now acknowledged Samuel's presence with quiet respect. Ahioka, cautious and thoughtful, had begun to rely on him for guidance and assistance. Tayanita, playful and humorous, had formed a bond of mutual understanding and camaraderie. Together, They had transformed their initial mockery into a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared experience. Samuel realized that life in the settlement was more than survival. It was about community, connection, and shared responsibility. The chief's order, once shocking and overwhelming, had become an opportunity to grow, learn, and belong. Samuel understood that belonging was not simply about being present, but about actively contributing, respecting others, and being willing to face challenges with courage and humility. One afternoon, Samuel and the widows sat together near the edge of the settlement, watching the sun dip below the hills. The air was warm, the snow long melted, and the village hummed with life. Naeli spoke, explaining something about the planting season, while Ahioka offered suggestions for organizing supplies. Tayanita laughed softly at Samuel's clumsy attempt to carry a basket of seedlings. Samuel smiled, realizing that the playful banter of the past had become a shared joy, a sign of trust and connection rather than mockery. In the quiet moments that followed, Samuel reflected on his journey. He had arrived as a stranger, laughed at and tested by the widows, uncertain of his place in the settlement. Through patience, humility, and consistent effort, he had earned respect and trust. He had learned to work alongside the widows, to anticipate their needs, and to act with care and attentiveness. He had become part of the community, valued for his contributions and respected for his character. The villagers, too, had come to accept Samuel as one of their own. Men sought his advice on hunting and tracking, children followed him with curiosity, and the widows treated him as a trusted partner. Samuel realized that this acceptance was not a single moment, but the result of many small actions, choices, and gestures that demonstrated respect, skill, and humility. He had earned his place through effort and integrity, and the bond he shared with the widows had grown into one of trust, understanding, and mutual support. As evening fell, Samuel stood near the center of the settlement, looking out over the plains. The wind carried the scent of flowers and earth, and the village was alive with the sounds of life, children laughing, animals moving, and the quiet hum of daily activity. Samuel felt a profound sense of peace. He had arrived in this settlement as a traveler, uncertain and cautious, but he had become part of something greater than himself. He had learned the meaning of trust, responsibility, and connection, and he knew that his life would never be the same. That night, as he lay beneath the stars, Samuel reflected on the journey that had begun with mockery and uncertainty. The chief's order, which had seemed overwhelming, had guided him toward growth, understanding, and belonging. The widows who had tested and challenged him had become teachers, partners, and friends. And Samuel had learned that life's true rewards were found not in ease or comfort, but in effort, patience, and the courage to face challenges with respect and humility. In the quiet of the night, Samuel understood that he had truly found a home. The settlement, the widows, and the chief had shaped him into someone stronger, wiser, and more connected. He had discovered that trust, respect, and partnership were the foundations of meaningful life, and he felt gratitude for every challenge, every lesson, and every bond he had built. Samuel's journey had begun with mockery, but it ended with connection, understanding, and the knowledge that belonging was earned through courage, care, and consistent effort. And as the stars twinkled above the quiet village, Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of a community that had become his home, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had proven himself worthy of their trust, respect, and companionship.